Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another Big Brother video that I've done a Survivor version of, but this time we're going to be talking about the most screwed over player for every season, where I will say, coming into this video, I very much expected there to be a lot of easy answers for Big Brother, and to be fair, there definitely are a fair share of them, but there's also like a good chunk of seasons where I feel like it's actually very difficult to say who the most screwed over player was. But again, like my Survivor video, again, by saying most screwed over, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people that I do end up picking were screwed over in the game and had no way out. But really, just in general, the people I'm going to be picking here are just the people that I think were the most unlucky over the course of their season, particularly in how they end up losing the game, to where, again, that ends up being my main criteria here. And to where, again, while there are definitely some easy answers along the way, there's also some ones that were very difficult to parse out who exactly I should pick. But again, through this video, I'll be running through all of Big Brother history, running through the mainline show, seasons 2 through 26. Again, I won't be including BB1 just because it's BB1. Again, I theoretically could have come up with an answer there, but I just really don't care about BB1. But beyond that, I will actually be talking about the spinoffs, as again, when else am I going to be talking about the spinoffs for a topic like this? So again, I will be including OTT, I'll be including Celebrity Big Brother, and I will also be including Reindeer Games, because why not? But with that, again, we'll be running through the mainline series first in chronological order, so let's start off with Big Brother 2. And BB2 is one of those that, again, I don't really think there is a like super solid answer here. Again, I do think looking at the board, I mean, it's a point where the game was like pretty rudimentary to where I don't know how much you could say these people were screwed over. I mean, the people I considered were, again, the likes of Nicole, the likes of Hardy, where I do think this was specifically a format that did harm them in comparison to future seasons. But again, I would not necessarily say that they were screwed over. But again, I do think they would have been benefited had, again, the veto been in play, where I think Hardy probably wins a game where the veto is in play. And beyond that, also, again, I think the unsequestered jury is something that doesn't help their overall perception either. Though, again, it's still a spot where, again, they were not particularly loved even in the house by the time people were leaving. Again, I didn't really feel right picking them. But the person I did end up going with here actually is the first boo of the season. We got Cheryl. And again, Cheryl's something that I do think it's very unlucky in the way that she goes out. Now, again, I wouldn't necessarily say that she was screwed, but she was still in a spot where, again, she was nominated as a pawn, the first ever pawn, and someone that, again, Boogie had no intention of taking out. Really, no one like actively wanted her out. They just wanted to take a shot against Chilltown. And I think the fact that she was essentially just the person picked to be the one sniped out of the game in this spot, again, I do think is very unlucky. Especially considering, again, she was essentially put up there with the assumption that she'll be safe because everyone loved her. So it's essentially a spot where, again, she was so affable to the cast that she was put up as a pawn. Where, again, it's kind of this weird circumstance where, again, it's not really her being screwed, but I would say it's, again, a very unlucky position that she ends up being put in. Next, I'm moving on to BB3. And BB3 is another one. Again, there's, again, some people you could consider here. Again, I consider Daniel Reyes, where, again, the unsequestered jury definitely harmed her, though at the end of the day, again, she wasn't necessarily screwed. Again, she knew that there was an unsequestered jury. Also, even beyond that, I mean, like, she probably still loses even if there was a sequestered jury. So, again, I did not pick her. I consider Marcellus, which might not be a popular opinion, but I do think the fact that the veto that he ended up winning, being the first ever golden power of veto, being the first time that there was even the option of taking yourself off the block, I think it is something I do give, like, Marcellus, again, a little bit of grace in him not using the veto, but, again, not that much. Also, I consider Roddy, though this is kind of a weird one too, where Roddy, I think, is in a spot where he, again, wasn't necessarily screwed, but I do think he is someone that really played into recognizing how perception outside the show can affect your game, and through that played the game in a very precise way that kind of limited the amount of manipulation he was able to utilize, at least openly so, where, again, I think it's kind of like him being kind of hamstrung a bit by the game format, but again, I wouldn't necessarily say he was screwed. And again, I also considered Lori, who I think gets very unlucky in how she goes out, with the veto being used on Marcellus, who is the bigger target, and then her going out in a spot where people didn't necessarily want her out. But again, I did not go with her. The person I did go with here is actually Kiara, and this is a spot where it's mainly because of the specific way she goes out, where realistically Kiara didn't play well. I think she was probably on her way out pretty soon anyways. So I do think the fact that she gets taken out by Amy after Amy returns to the game, essentially, again, her biggest enemy in the game that she had already gotten evicted, comes back into the game and is able to win HOH to take her out of the game. I think that is an unlucky circumstance to where, while, again, I don't think Kiara played particularly well around that, I think the exact way she gets taken out, the fact that she is taken out by someone that was literally not in the game the previous week, and in a spot where, again, she couldn't play in the HOH. And again, I think there's just a lot of circumstances there that has her being pretty unfortunate in this spot, which is why I did pick her here. Next for BB4, and again, a lot of considerations, but tough to hone down on the answer. And really, most of the considerations that I did not pick were the X's. And I think just fundamentally, the X's were pretty screwed coming into the season. I mean, they were in a spot where the majority of the house were able to hang up against the X's, where the X's were just these easy targets early on. Now, obviously, the Stooges end up actually getting past that and end up actually gaining some capital in the game, but I would still say that, again, they were unfortunate in the position that they were originally in. I would say Michelle, again, was very unfortunate, and her being taken out kind of as a casualty of the Stooges not recognizing that the X's were on the outs. While also I would say Amanda is someone that was particularly screwed. I think Amanda was actually someone that I would consider even more so, in the sense that she's someone that, again, was an X, so through that very disadvantage already, but then also her ex was Scott, to where they had an extremely toxic relationship, which made Amanda an easier person to pin the target on, where, again, I think that's very unlucky as well. However, I did not go with Amanda. The person I went with is actually the person that she had sex with in the house, and that is David. And again, I picked David here. I mean, David, I think, gets very unfortunate in the fact that he was actually in a pretty good spot in the game. I think he was pretty safe. No one really wanted him out. Though ends up being taken out in a spot where, again, during Dana's HOH, he's essentially target number 3 for her. Yet Nathan ends up winning the veto, uses it on Allison, and that ends up leading to David going on the block. Even then, he almost stays, but obviously doesn't by the end. But again, I think it's just the fact that he was in this spot where coming into the week, he was in a very good position, and he ends up literally being, again, target number 3 on the board, where he just gets very unfortunate comp results during that week that leads to him going home. That, again, I don't think he was necessarily someone that was screwed over, but I do think, again, a series of unfortunate events here led to his elimination, which, again, made me pick David by the end. Next up for BB5, and BB5 is a tough one here. I think, again, definitely some considerations. You got, again, Nokomis and Cowboy, who I'll mention here as, again, having this very strange twist being revealed that I think very much shaked up how they played the game, really hampered them, and feeling the need to at least attempt to work with one another, where, again, it's something. I would not pick them because of that, but I do think it's definitely something to consider. I'd also consider the twins, to where, I mean, you could say that, okay, the twins, that they obviously had each other, and that could be a benefit in the game, but I do think it was actually more so a negative. I think it obviously ostracized them in the game. Also, it was particularly tough on Natalie, who, again, no one really knew who she was when she entered the game, and had to kind of reintroduce herself midway through the game. And again, I think that's a very tough position to be in, but they also played terribly around that, where, again, I didn't really feel right picking them. I did consider Will, who I did think wasn't necessarily screwed over by a twist by any degree, but was more so screwed over by, again, just very clear homophobia in the house. And I do think that definitely harmed the way that he was able to navigate through the game, and obviously, again, leads to part of his elimination through the twins targeting him because God told her to do so, I guess. And I think there's some wonky stuff there, but did not pick him. And I also did consider Jace, who, again, I wouldn't necessarily say was screwed by a twist, considering, and literally everyone was targeting him coming into that week anyway. But again, I think he did have some unfortunate circumstances occur during his boot week, and the fact that the twins end up entering the game, which just, again, makes it so he's facing off against one extra number. But also the fact that he obviously he's the first victim of the back door in a spot where just kind of everything aligned in that spot to where they could just take him out with him having any chance of playing the veto. Something that obviously they rectify down the road to at least make it so that it's not this guaranteed spot that he has no chance, where, again, they make it a random draw in the future. So, again, because the fact that the veto format in this season was, again, kind of gameable, I did consider him. But the person I did actually end up picking for BB5, though, ends up being, again, a maybe not obvious pick here, but I did pick Karen. And for Karen here, the reason for this pick here comes down to the Final 5 veto. And in a spot where, again, she gets taken out at the Final 5 because of Diane winning the veto, using it on Drew, and then they proceed to take out Karen. In a spot where, obviously, Nokomis, the HOH, was protecting Karen over anybody else, to where, again, Karen gets very unlucky in that situation happening. However, I think the thing that is Karen being screwed is the fact that production allowed Diane and Drew and Cowboy also to work together in the veto comp in a spot where, again, it's just a very unfortunate circumstance that was even a veto comp that could be one they work together in that way, where, again, that's not necessarily the case for most given situations. The fact that Karen specifically got this veto competition here that allows for them to all work together and gives them a massive benefit from working together, I do think is a very unfortunate circumstance. And I think the thing about Karen that adds to her being screwed is that she was, again, a pretty big front runner to win the game. If she gets to the end, I think she beats everybody but maybe Drew, and even that's like a super close vote, to where had she been able to stay that week. Cowboy goes home. If the veto plays out normally, she is in a spot where Etchi and Nokomis won the veto. She's at final 3, and at that point, she's in a spot where, again, she's pretty close to getting to the end. She has a number 1 ally, and if she gets to the end, she goes on to win the game. Where, again, I think the fact that she was, again, relatively close to winning the game is something that definitely plays a factor here as well. So, again, that's why I went with Karen. Next for BB6, and, again, BB6, not really that great of an answer here. I mean, I do think something to consider is obviously the secret pairs twist, and through that, again, I actually considered Yvette. Now, I will say at the end of the day, Yvette loses the game, obviously due to her own poor play, her poor jury management with Rachel. However, again, I do think it is a bit unfortunate that Rachel was tied to Howie. Now, obviously, she knew that, which is why I'm not picking Yvette here, but still, I do think when she lost Rachel's vote, she also lost Howie's vote in the jury, which ends up costing her the game. Where, again, the fact that they were even connected to begin with, I think is, again, a little bit unfortunate, but obviously, again, I think she played poorly despite that. Also, again, in terms of bad partners, I consider Janelle, who, again, had Ashlea, who leaves right away. So yeah, I consider her. April is someone I considered, considering how unfortunate the veto result was, and at the final 4, especially as she probably beats everybody at the end, though, again, I still didn't end up picking her. Probably someone that, again, you could theoretically say was screwed by the game format is James. And again, James, to me, again, was not, like, overtly screwed, but I do think it's in a similar case to someone like Jace from BB5 in the sense that he was someone that was essentially like kept around until final 6 where they could just backdoor him. Again, we still had the format where there was no random draw for veto. It was a position where they could just ice James out of playing in the veto, and through that, and he was just essentially a goner at final 7. So I think that's him being kind of screwed over by the current game format to the point where obviously they changed the format the following season. Where, again, I think it's something to mention here. Rachel, someone I considered as someone that I think was pretty much targeted at the final 8 there, simply because of her and Howie still both being in the game. I do think if it was not for that, I think Rachel definitely could have survived in that spot, but I think it's a spot where, because they were one of the last duos remaining in the game, it made them a lot easier of a target to where I think she gets a little bit unfortunate because of that. I also considered Cappy, where, again, Cappy's in a spot where, I mean, all these, like, precise things need to happen to lead up to his elimination. Even then, he barely goes out. And a super close vote. So, again, I think there's some poor play there, but again, I at least considered him. But the person I ultimately went with here ends up being Sarah. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that Sarah really didn't do that much, like, actively wrong to cause her elimination in the game. It really was, like, more so her association to James and all things James was doing wrong in the game, which is the main reason I didn't pick James here, because I initially did think about picking James. As, again, I do think there's justification there for James, considering the backdoor situation. But, again, I do think James was in that position because of a lot of actively poor play. And I feel like Sarah is someone that really ends up being the recipient of that poor play, with her really being on the block largely because of James being called out for all of his lies and the friendship being able to turn the Sovereigns against him because of that. And again, Sarah was essentially just the backup target here in a spot where, again, if James goes during that week, I do think Sarah's probably safe immediately afterwards. And even by the end of that week, the Sovereigns were, like, regretting Sarah in that position to take her out. And ultimately, again, I do think it's a spot here where I think Sarah just got very unfortunate and how James just completely tanked their games to where, while, again, Sarah's not a particularly good player, and I don't think she really even cared that much about the game, I do think she's someone that didn't do that much wrong here. So, again, I made her my pick for this. Next up for BB7. And, again, there's a few people to consider here. I mean, I think you could say Will was kind of screwed in spot that he was in particular of, again, Boogie having one HOH, and that being the reason why he specifically was eliminating that spot, though, again, not enough to actually pick him. Is there Danielle Reyes? Because Danielle Reyes came into the season with a massive target on her back, and obviously it made it a bit tougher to navigate through the game, but again, I did not pick her. I also consider, like, pretty much all of the Sovereigns here, but particularly the likes of a James, a Howie, a Kaser, them all obviously having massive targets on their backs coming from Big Brother 6. But I would say more so I would consider Howie, specifically because you also mix in the fact that he has taken out in his boot week kind of because of Mike threatening to use his power, which in itself was actually not allowed, to the point where Mike was actually stripped of his power because he did that. To where, again, I think that's something to at least consider there. I did also consider Nokomis, who is someone that came into the season with a pretty big bullseye on her back, especially with a lack of pregame relationships, though the person I'm going to pick here, again, is essentially Nokomis adjacent, and that person's Diane. And again, it might feel like a random pick picking Diane here, but I do think Diane was, again, also in a similar spot to Nokomis of coming into this game, very few allies, just from how the pregame played out, BB5 was in a lot of danger and again, just simply did not have any connections in the game. Also, like, had an open feud with Janelle before the season even started, which puts her in a pretty rough position coming into the season, but also almost pulls off a big move. I mean, almost flips the vote on Will, and I do think she gets very unfortunate that vote not going through because Jace picks a fight with Marcellus right before the eviction, where again, she had the votes lined up, but wasn't able to execute on that, which again, I don't think is really due to much fault on her own, and obviously that ultimately leads to her having really nobody to save her the following week, but even then, that's a spot where she wasn't initially the target, to where, again, I think there's a lot of unlucky circumstances happening around Diane, along for also, again, just coming into the game in a very tough position to begin with, so again, I decided to pick Diane in this spot. Next up are BB-8, and now we're finally getting to an easy answer. I mean, now we're getting to the point where pretty definitive answer, and the answer is literally almost the entire cast. I think you legitimately say pretty much everybody but Dick and Danielle, who obviously ended massively benefiting from America's Player, but again, you could debate a lot of people here, straight up. You could debate for a lot of other reasons. Again, Zach is someone you consider as the person that actually loses to Dick in the final 3 HOH comp, and also, again, considering Dick's cheating in the final HOH comp. Again, I would consider Zach. I also consider Jamaica, who, again, gets this very unfortunate punishment of not being able to compete in numerous HOHs, which, again, very much stifled her overall game position. But along with Jamaica, I also consider, again, the likes of Jessica, the likes of Amber, the likes of Dustin, all of which affected by America's Player in a spot where, because of the America's Player twists, again, they essentially had a saboteur within their own alliance that kind of ruined things for them. With probably Dustin obviously being the answer I would have picked within the alliance as the person that was like directly taken out due to America's influence. But I would also consider Nick, where Nick is someone that gets kind of taken out because, again, he was framed for all of the hinky votes that occurred due to America's Players. Again, I think he's also consideration. But the person I, again, ended up going with is Eric. And again, obviously he is America's Player. He was the person who was made to do all these things that sabotage his game. But even beyond that, again, he was in a spot where he probably just runs this season and not been for America's Player. I think he's someone that, like, pretty much had the perfect cast for him. Again, had a pretty strong position in the game, had so many allies, again, literally gets backdoored and survives that backdoor. But I do think he is a major front runner to win had America's Player not been in place. But through America's Player, he obviously has to go out of his way to save Dick at numerous opportunities, isn't allowed to use the VDOT Final 7, a spot where he knew that the right call for his game was to do so. And again, just in general, was not given the option to truly play the game, to where I think it's an unfortunate situation for Eric there. So while I think you can definitely consider like people that were as the direct ramifications of the moves that Eric made, I do still feel like Eric in general feels the most screwed of them all, with him not even being able to play his own game within all this, and being in a spot where, again, this potentially could have been a winning game. So again, I did go with Eric here. Next up are BB9, and BB9 is a tough one because there are so many people you could say were screwed by so many different circumstances. I mean, BB9, you have Ryan, who is someone that I think you could say got screwed by having such a terrible partner in the game, and Jen, who proceeds to throw him under the bus constantly and tells people that he's a racist, and also by the end, supposedly a lot of the jury did not want to reward Ryan with the win because they hated Jen so much and didn't want to give Jen the money, to where, again, I think Ryan gets screwed over by a lot of factors there. Sharon is someone to obviously talk about, where I think people probably would pick Sharon typically. Again, obviously she gets screwed over by the final 4 HOH question, where had she not been screwed by that question, it would have been a tie. And again, who knows what would have happened there. Now, I will say, I feel like it didn't feel right for me to pick Sharon here, simply because realistically, I think Sharon's just gone at 3. Even if she wins that final 4 HOH, I don't think she was particularly likely to beat Adam and Ryan in the final HOH. So again, while I do think she got screwed over by that question, I don't feel like for me it's enough to pick her as my pick. The thing that would actually put her more in contention is the fact that she was attached to Jacob, and Jacob sabotaged their games at the very beginning, though the fact that she was able to re-enter the game later, I think kind of rectifies that as well, where, again, I do think at the end of the day, for me, I would consider Sharon. Oh, that was, again, screwed, but not to any, like, significant degree. I would also say Maddie is someone to consider here, as someone that, again, literally leads the charge in getting rid of James, only for James to return to the game, and him being sniped out of the game immediately following that. Now again, did he play particularly well once James returned? Not really, but I do think that is definitely obviously a very unlucky circumstance, so I did consider him. But for me, really the main considerations here were the victims of the Till Death Do Us Part twist, the people that were taken out, not because people wanted them out in particular, but more so because they wanted their partners out, with those being Alex and Parker. So the question is, which one did I go with here? And I personally went with Alex, which is a bit strange. I do think Parker was more so sunk by his partner than Alex was. I do think Alex probably shares some of the blame in him being targeted with Amanda, where I feel like Parker like almost entirely just goes home because of Jen. But I do think Alex gets screwed over in another situation as well, and that is the vote to return to the game. Now, obviously, just the opportunity to return to the game is something that, again, Alex is fortunate to even have to begin with, but I would also say that I do think the fact that the players were not told who the player that would have returned to the game had they voted Mystery House guests is something that, again, definitely disfavored Alex there. Against a spot where Alex probably gets voted back in if they had known the vote was between James and Alex. Well, I think that's a major reason why Adam and Natalie end up voting James back into the game as a spot where it didn't fully benefit them to do so. Where, again, I do think because of that, and also the fact that he was, again, still screwed by the Till Death Do Us Part twist, where I do think a lot of the house openly wanted Amanda out much more than Alex. I do think it's still a spot where, again, I think he's screwed in multiple facets, which is why he's my pick for BB9. Next up for BB10, and BB10, again, is one that I don't think there's a really good answer. I don't think really there's a single person on this season that I would quantify as screwed, and there's some unlucky circumstances. I mean, there's people that, we're facing off against a very unassuming Dan Giesling. So, again, you got like someone like a Memphis who, again, did not realize how much Dan was undercutting him along the way. Ollie obviously makes a deal with Dan, only not realizing that Dan would do what he did in like replacement nominee roulette and all that. Libra is someone that I think it's unfortunate that she pulls off this big Jessie move, only to then have a bad HOH result, mainly falling that it takes her out. Jessie is someone to consider here as, America's player was involved in him going out. Now, at the end of the day, Dan probably votes him out anyway, which is why I'm not picking him. But again, the person I end up going with here ends up being Rennie, I guess. And again, not because Rennie's that good, but again, I think she's in a spot where, she was not that far away from winning the game. She was in a spot where at the final five, I think she gets unfortunate the fact that Jerry wins HOH, a spot where everyone was targeting Jerry. And even at that point, she was in a spot where she was relatively safe. Jerry doesn't nominate her, only for her to obviously be the renom once Memphis wins the veto. Where, again, she pretty much only gets taken out in this spot in that precise situation where Dan or Memphis win the veto here, to where, again, I think that is pretty unlucky. Now, again, not nearly as bad as some of the other more screwed over players, but I would say, again, an unlucky circumstance that makes me pick her. Next up for BB11, and I think this one's pretty obvious. I think the main culprits of these people that get unlucky are, again, the people that were screwed over by the coup d'etat. It's where, again, we got Natalie, we got Jessie, we got Shima. I think really any of these three could be claimed to be the person. Now, Natalie actually still survives all of it, makes the final two, so I'm not going to pick her. To where, beyond that, I think most people would pick Jessie in this spot. However, I'm actually going to pick Shima. Now, realistically, I don't think either of them were particularly long for the game. To where a lot of people claim that the coup d'etat was, again, this thing that really screwed over Jessie, that Jessie was completely safe in the game and now he gets sniped out. That's not really the case. I do think Jessie, again, was probably on his way out pretty soon afterwards, where, again, Jeff and Jordan and Michelle were all targeting him at that point. Also, again, he wanted to keep Jeff and Jordan into the game for a bit longer, and considering how comps played out, again, I don't think he was particularly long for the game anyway. So, again, because of that, I think I would lean Shima. Now, to be fair, Shima, again, was also not particularly long for the game. People did not like her. A lot of people were targeting her. Now, again, they had Jessie to deal with first, but again, she was still the backup target in that case. But obviously, I think beyond that, I think the thing to add to Shima being screwed over is the fact that she obviously loses her HOH and all this. That she obviously ends up setting up Russell to go. Russell's on his deathbed, and then out of the blue, obviously, he gets saved, and she ends up losing her closest ally instead. Again, that's obviously very unfortunate. I think that adds to just how much more screwed over Shima was in this spot, to where, while, again, I don't think she was long for the game either way, I think this was obviously a very unfortunate circumstance, to where, again, I end up picking her over Jessie. Next for BB12, and there was literally someone that was taken out due to a twist. Beyond that, I think you can consider Brittany, who gets unfortunate in the fact that Hayden wins those final four comps. As again, I do think she had Lane's loyalty, and Lane would have taken her to the end. Again, she could have beaten him, so again, I would consider her. Kristen is someone I would consider here as someone that, again, was not really being targeted by a lot of house at the point that she goes out. Yeah, again, Rachel decides to pick a fight with her and target her. To where, again, I think that's a little bit unfortunate that she had that one specific situation play out that way. Also, I would consider Annie, who obviously comes in as a saboteur and through that has this burden on her back as she's playing the game, though still probably would have played sloppily either way. To where I think at the end of the day, the person I'm going to go with here is, again, someone that was directly taken out by a twist. That person is Kathy. And again, Kathy doesn't play particularly well across the season. She was like literally taken out by the twist because she was the person that Matt had no connections to. But I still think it's unfortunate this twist occurred. This twist was the thing that allowed her to be sniped out of the game, as really, if she doesn't get sniped out in this spot, I think she's probably in it for at least a little while longer, where no one's looking at as a threat, keeping her around as this really expendable person, where, yeah, I think Kathy gets very unlucky in how exactly things play out here, even though, again, I still think there's some poor play attributed to her to cause those things to happen. Now for BB13, which obviously has a certain situation that would lead to the definitive answer for this question. So I do think I should at least mention Lawan, where, again, most people would not quantify this, as obviously Lawan did to himself. He self-nominated himself and got evicted. But the fact that the twist was, again, partially announced the previous week, allowing Lawan to spiral into thinking that being evicted would mean that you get some special power, did lead to him self-nominating, where, again, I think you could argue that's him being screwed, but obviously the real situation we're going to be talking about here is Pandora's Box at the final 6, where, and there's really 3 players you could argue this for, and you can argue this for Portia, whose HOH got overtaken, though realistically I feel like the game plays out pretty similarly for her either way. Kalia is someone to mention here as another person that was in the majority and gets kind of screwed, though again I also feel like her game plays out pretty similarly either way. So first I'm going to mention here is the person that got directly screwed by the twist, and that person is Shelly. And again, Shelly was in the spot where she should have been safe this week. Again, it would have been very difficult to get Shelly out this week. It would have necessitated someone that wasn't Rachel or Jordan winning the veto and then using the veto to take one of them off, which again was never really happening. So again, through that, Shelly was definitely screwed over in terms of getting taken out that specific week, while also beyond that, had a path to the end. Now, realistically, based on the comp results, I don't think it would have happened, and even then, I don't know if she wins a jury vote, considering how upset the vets were at Shelly for turning on them, but again, there's at least a shot, and she definitely wouldn't have been booted at Final 6. So again, I think she's probably the person I would pick out of this group to be the answer here. Next up would be BB14, and here I think you have a few considerations, though I think there's one definitive answer. Now, I will consider Dan as someone that came into this game with no real chance at winning. Again, the House pretty much already agreed that they would not reward him with the win, along with the fact that he also got very unfortunate with a lot of comp results and twists playing out certain ways, where again, I did not pick him. Also did not pick Danielle, where had it not been for Ian's comp run, Danielle's a very likely winner. Now, again, I think she obviously makes enough mistakes to where I would not pick her. Yeah, again, I think it's someone to consider here. Also considered Brittany, who is probably the secondary answer here. I think she's probably the next most screwed outside the person I did pick, where Brittany is someone that gets obviously taken out due to Dan's funeral. Obviously a very wonky circumstance there, but even beyond that, gets taken out in a spot where the main target was actually Ian, and if Ian did not have that second veto, Brittany does stay, and in that spot she would have still a lot of influence in the game. So again, I do think she got very much screwed over in that spot. Yet again, did not pick her. Also considered, again, the other vets in Boogie and Janelle, who had big targets coming in this season, no real chance at winning this season. Boogie in particular didn't even want to play the game itself, where again, I think both of them are considerations. JoJo is someone I considered as someone that kind of gets taken out due to the fact that she was just attached to Willie, and also Shane ends up winning the veto, where again, I think she gets pretty unfortunate, though again, she didn't really play well around that anyway. Kara is also someone to mention here, again, someone that got nominated as a pawn, simply because she was on Dan's team, and again, gets taken out as collateral after all of Willie's hijinks, to where, again, I think she's someone to mention, though I think the definitive answer here is obviously Jody, and again, we might be picking similar people to Jody down the road in this video, but again, I do think Jody, someone that obviously had no real shot. He was booted day 1, got taken out due to a very wonky format, one that isn't even, again, the typical Big Brother format. Literally just, again, was the last picked for a coach. Dan has to vote out someone right away and votes her out. Again, it's kind of a crappy situation, one that, again, I do think she was pretty much screwed over just by preconceived notions. Next, we move on to BB15, and here, I mean, the main considerations were the likes of Candace and Howard, who are obviously kind of screwed by the overall casting of this season and how poorly they were treated. Yet, from a game perspective, I think the main thing you could say people were screwed over by is the MVP twist, where through that, really, I would consider any of the first 3 boots. And you got David, you got Nick, you got Jeremy, all of which I think were screwed by the twist to some degree, where obviously David was nominated by the MVP twist and proceeded to be taken out. Jeremy is someone that would have had a stronger position in the game had it not been for the MVP twist that took out one of his allies, though, again, I'm going to go for the person that was directly affected by the twist the most, and that person is Nick. And again, I think Nick was very unfortunate in the game. Nick was someone that actually had a lot of balls rolling in the game, seemed to be in a very strong position, where while, again, he definitely did falter and him not really reaching out beyond his own alliance, I do feel like he was in a strong position, only to be sniped out due to the MVP twist, and also in a spot where he was not even the initial target. Jeremy won the veto, used it on himself, Nick goes up as a replacement, and even then, it took a lot of circumstances to even cause the Nick eviction, with the moving company completely fracturing, and McCrae to start hooking up with Amanda. And again, I think Nick gets very unlucky in how all these things play out. So while there obviously is poor play within that, none of that would have mattered if it was not for the MVP twist to begin with. So again, I think Nick is the pretty definitive answer here. Next for BB16, and I think there's also an easy answer here now. And I would consider the likes of like Nicole, who was kind of screwed over by the bow the block twist, in the sense that she had actually won HOH and gets dethroned, though, again, at the end of the day, also, it's like, would Christina beat her if it was a one-person HOH? And even then, it wasn't really that close to winning the game either way, and also, again, it comes back into the game. It kind of rectifies that bad luck anyway. Also, I considered Zach, where I feel like he's someone that, well, again, not really poised to do well long-term in the game. I do feel like he was in a spot where kind of gets taken out a bit earlier than he normally would have, just simply because of Battle of the Block, because there were so few options on the board, and Donnie wins the Battle of the Block, which keeps him safe, to where Zach was not the initial target that week. More than likely would have been good had Donnie not had the chance to save himself in Battle of the Block, so again, that's something. But the person I'm going to go with here, pretty definitive, I'm going to go Frankie. And again, all of this comes from, obviously, the Final 5 round, where he was initially the HOH, initially had it set so Victoria would go home, he would get the Final 4, though then Rewind Week happens, where all that gets reversed, and he proceeds to be taken out instead, where, again, I think that's very unlucky, obviously, for Frankie, but where, again, he should have been guaranteed Final 4, he obviously would have had a good chance to win out from that point forward. He would really only need to win one of the comps at Final 4, and then, obviously, Final 3 HOH likely wins the game. I would say it's not even a guarantee, as I think there's at least a shot he takes Derek still, though if he does take Caleb, I do think he wins, so, again, I still think it's a spot where, obviously, just very unfortunate that twist ended up occurring. Really lessened the chances of him going on to win. For a while, again, like, technically, he still had an opportunity where he could have just won the comps again that he previously won, though that time he didn't. But I still think it's a spot where he was extremely close to winning the game, was in a pretty prime position to go on to win the game, yet was kind of stripped out of that. So again, Frankie's my pick here. Next for BB17, and BB17 is actually one that I don't think there is a good answer for BB17. I don't think there's anyone that feels like directly screwed within the game. I mean, again, like in BB5, I'll mention the twins, where obviously, again, playing the game as twins is something that is very difficult in the game, and it's, again, especially for someone like Julia, who wasn't really able to build the same connections in the same way, though at the same time, most people knew that they were twins by the mid-portion of the game, and actually ended up benefiting their position at a point where people were keeping them around so that they could join the game so that they would be numbers for them. So again, at the end of the day, I did not pick them. And really outside that, again, it's a lot more like basic situations. Again, like Meg, who's someone that was not the initial target, gets taken out due to the veto. Jackie is someone that kind of gets sniped from the game, having like a very unfortunate HOH result where not many people were actually going to target her, yet Steve wins and targets her instead there. But the person I'm going to go with here ends up being Jason. And again, it's not really for any like major reasons. It's really, again, he wasn't the initial target. He was the backup target. Beyond that, he also gets very unfortunate how Battle of the Block plays out, where the entire house had this plan to put up to backdoor Austin, yet that obviously doesn't go through, simply because despite James trying to throw Battle of the Block, Liz ends up winning it on her own, which proceeds to have Vanessa as HOH, to where obviously she ends up shaking things up by the end. And I think that's, again, at least a bit unlucky for Jason. Now, again, he doesn't really stand up against the most screwed over players of all time. Yeah, so I think for BB17, which doesn't really have that many options, I feel like he's the best we got here. Next for BB18, and we have a couple options here. I think you can consider someone like Bridget, who, well, again, didn't play well for a lot of the game, at least was in a spot where her game was kind of starting to turn around, and she kind of gets sniped out by a bad HOH result at the double. I also considered Zakia, who kind of gets taken out due to nothing that she actively did. It was more so Polly's poor play that ends up taking her out. I also considered Bronte. That gets taken out directly due to the roadkill competition, where her closest ally won HOH and she should have been safe, yet again gets taken out due to the roadkill comp, where even in that, again, the vote flips to the last second. Again, I think there's a lot of wonky circumstances there. I did not go with her because I think there's a more definitive answer. That person is Glenn. And to be fair, I even debated it for a while between Glenn and Bronte, where I do think in Bronte's stage, she probably would have had more potential in the game than Glenn, where I feel like Glenn was always going to be a target relatively early on due to the fact that he was so openly against the vets. Yet he was still someone that, again, never really got the chance to play proper Big Brother. He simply was eliminated due to losing comp after comp after comp. And considering he was also facing off against like a pretty competitive field, I mean, Tiffany, Nicole, and Corey are all pretty decent competitions. I do feel like, considering that fact, I feel like Glenn was, again, kind of screwed in this spot. No real chance to play the game, which is the reason I went with him here. Next up for BB19, we have a kind of similar situation. Again, some people to talk about, I mean, someone like Jess, who I think her game completely blows up due to the actions of Cody, though obviously she doesn't play particularly well at points outside that. Ramsey is someone to talk about, someone that obviously gets taken out, again, just due to the mistakes that Jessica makes. So obviously, again, still poor play within that. I think the main consideration here that I did not end up going with was Jillian, and I was so close to doing so. I feel like Jillian might be one of the most unlucky players in the history of the show, to where she's someone that was not the initial target, was always the pawn, but had to go through so many numerous people next to her that she probably would have stayed next to. Again, had Josh not one safety, Josh is probably on the block. Josh potentially goes home. Beyond that, I do think she stays over Megan until Megan leaves. Alex was on the block. I think Alex leaves over her. Alex wins the veto. And at that point, again, between Paul and Christmas, she probably doesn't stay against either of them. But I do think she gets very unfortunate to be in the position that she is in, where, again, she had so many outs across the week, and then they just kind of slipped away from her, to where, again, I very much consider her, yet I did not pick her because we got someone else that didn't get a chance to play the game. That person is Cameron. And again, this one was close. I do think Cameron is someone that at least had a fighting chance in the game, which is the reason why I considered more so Jillian in this spot, where, again, unlike someone like Glenn and Jody, who had very wonky elimination rounds, where, again, Jody was eliminated just by one single person, Glenn was eliminated by competitions, like, Cameron was actually voted out by a vote from the entire house, where I think that's something that makes his situation not as screwy, though I do think the thing that still made me land on Cameron is the fact that he was largely taken out due to pre-game notions. Again, just the fact that he was this, like, nerdy guy that people assume would be a big threat in the game, to where, again, because of that, I don't think he had a fair shot at things. He only had at night to try to save himself, and again, I think that would have been a tough spot to get out of, to where, well, again, technically you did have the likes of Jillian and Christmas that got out of that spot. I do feel like for someone like Cameron, I do think it would have been very difficult to turn that around, where, again, I think it's close between him and Jillian. I do think Jillian, again, had a lot more unlucky circumstances happen to her. Yeah, I do feel like Cameron was in a spot where he didn't really get a fair shake at trying to stay, which is the reason why I went with him here. Next up for BB20, and there's not many, like, real options here. I think there's really the one. But again, other considerations. I consider Tyler as someone that I think if there was a old school jury format, I think Tyler could very much win the game. But with the very short jury questioning, he obviously doesn't. But at the end of the day, again, still did not go with him. I'd also consider Sam, who spent most of the first week as a robot. And I feel like that is something to mention that harmed her initial social standing, though obviously she gets out of that anyway. I did consider Haley as someone that, again, was kind of surrounded by really terrible players, while Haley herself was not particularly good either. I do feel like, again, at least she didn't do as much of the actively bad work within Faltate, where, again, I at least considered her. Bailey is someone I considered just simply because of the fact that she was targeted in that specific week because she had her power, though, to be fair, obviously she was the one to leak her power, so again, it's really her fault, but again, I at least want to mention that. Rachel, someone I want to mention as someone that gets taken out largely due to a misunderstanding that the level 5 alliance thought that she was turning against them and going to work with Bailey, though, again, that wasn't really the case, though, obviously, again, there's still poor play from Rachel and all that as well. Also considered Caitlyn, who was screwed over for them giving her an impossible puzzle, so that's something. I do also want to mention Swaggy and Steve, both of which I think were taken out just because they had a very wonky ally in Caitlyn, where, again, while, again, they didn't do strong enough play to really lock Caitlyn in, I do feel like, again, Caitlyn is Caitlyn, or, again, I'll at least mention them, but person that I picked here, again, the only person here that felt like they were taken out directly due to a twist, we got Rockstar. And again, Rockstar was in a spot where her ally had won HOH. She should have been safe, though with the hacker twist being in play, it allowed for Casey to win the comp and nominate Rockstar. Rockstar goes home. Again, it's a very wonky circumstance there. One where, again, she should have been safe on most given seasons. And realistically, again, she's not that far away for someone like a Bronte, who I'd even pick for BB18. So it's not even like Rockstar's like someone that I would say is amongst the most screwed over players in Big Brother history. And even then, I would say Bronte's situation is probably even worse than Rockstar's. But still, Rockstar, I do think for this season in particular, is probably the only person I would say was actually screwed over by a twist. So again, easy answer there. Next for BB21, and again, a very easy answer, but again, we'll talk about some options. We got Nicole and Cliff, who I think were very unfortunate in the fact that they were facing off against Jackson, who was so good at competitions and never really gave them a spot to take him out of the game, though also, again, they also were the ones protecting him at a point where, again, I think that's some fault there. Tommy is someone to mention here. I think he was probably more directly screwed over by Jackson's comp run, where if Jackson had not won so many comps, I think Tommy probably goes on to win the game, though, again, did not end up picking him. I also considered Sam, who's someone that I did think kind of gets screwed over by the fact that Kat and Holly knew each other, where had that not been the case, I do think Jackson tries to flip the vote to save Sam at the last second, though obviously that could not end up happening due to Holly not being on board, so again, I would at least consider him. Also consider Bella, who is someone that gets taken out due to the activity power that Christy had, where had it not been for Christy threatening Cliff with the usage of that power. I do think Bella likely stays that week, but again, she was not really poised well long-term either way, so again, I did not go with her. Also, I mentioned Ovi, who is someone that also had a Whacktivity power, one that would have saved him in the game if he was able to use it. There was a power that was only able to be used at the beginning of the week, and considering he obviously got backdoored, he was not able to use the power, even though, again, it was something that could have saved him, so again, I'll at least mention that. But the person that I end up picking here, again, goes along with all the other ones we've picked previously. We got David Alexander, who, again, wasn't really given a fair shot at playing the game, eliminated in day one due to a competition, and obviously, he could have technically built a relation with Jackson to have Jackson not nominate him. I do think at the end of the day, he never got a proper chance on the season, so again, did decide to go with him here. Next for BB22, and there's not many like true considerations. I mean, I'll mention Tyler, who again, had he not been homesick, probably could have had a struggle running the game, though again, that's also kind of on him. I also consider Danielle, who also gets taken out in a triple eviction, which is obviously unprecedented at the time, to where, again, I do think had it been a normal week of the game, I think there's at least a shot she could stay, though again, did not go with her. Ian is someone I'll mention here, where, I mean, he does essentially get taken out due to a twist, where had it not been for David having immunity, I do think David likely goes, if not is at least targeted during that week, and beyond that, had Davon not used the veto on Kevin, I think Ian likely stays as well, where again, I think Ian had a few unlucky circumstances there, though again, did not go with him. Bailey is someone to mention here, someone that actually probably would have been in the committee had it not been for Memphis in particular, who fought against her inclusion, where again, initially, people did want her in the alliance, but Memphis fought back against it due to her connection with Davon, which again, at the end of the day, if again that did not happen, Bailey probably would have been in a good spot to make it deep into the game. So, again, that's someone to consider. Obviously, I'm going to mention Janelle and Kaser, both of which obviously came in with pretty big targets on their backs and not many connections in the game, to where Janelle is someone in particular that I was closest to picking here, as I do think she was pretty screwed just from coming into the season. Though, the person I think that was actually more screwed in my answer for this season ends up being Keisha. And there's multiple factors here. One, the fact that obviously Keisha, not very well connected on this cast. Also, Keisha brought it in last second. Again, she literally was a alternate for the season after Keisha got dropped out, to where, again, I think that's also a factor there for Keisha. Along with the fact that she also wasn't even the initial target, to where while, again, Cody was fine with Keisha going, Keisha was always going to be the backup target either way. I mean, it's still a spot where Kaser was the initial target, and Kaser, having won the safety suite, ended up protecting him there, along with Janelle, to where Keisha just became the very obvious target after that, to where, and I think there's a lot of unfortunate circumstances for Keisha. It goes beyond her just being kind of unlucky with how a twist played out, but also, again, the fact that just even pre-game wise, she was not particularly well suited for this season. I feel like that's enough to make her my pick here. Next for BB23, and this one's a bit tough. I think this one's tough because there's not really a twist in the game that really like screws someone over, unless you want to talk about someone like Brittany, who obviously, again, got BB bucks from America's Vote, and that made her a bit of a target. But really outside that, again, there's not really someone that was directly twist screwed on the season, to where instead, I do feel like the person who I'm going to declare as the most screwed here is really by the overall context of the season. The fact that it happened in a spot where the cookout was formed, in a spot where, again, I think while the cookout is something that was a very noble cause that came together, it's still a spot where it probably only happened on this season. Where, I mean, that was kind of the point of it happening on this season. And considering that context, I think there's a lot of people that were whose games were very much affected by this notion. Obviously, you got people outside the cookout whose games were affected here. Again, the likes of Alyssa, who probably would have had a closer connection to Xavier had it not been the case. Though, again, I don't think she was really set up to win either way. And Claire and DX are two people that were probably set up for deep into the game. And I think DX is someone that could have very likely won out at the very end and won the game had the cookout not existed. So, again, I considered them. Christian is someone I also considered as someone that, again, probably at least stays in his boot week had it not been for the cookout. Yeah, again, that did not happen. Also, even within the cookout, I think you consider someone like Kylan, who, again, probably would have also been in a prime spot to win out had it not been for a cookout with Xavier out of the game, though also it's like, I think he made his own mistakes where I didn't pick him. Hannah is someone to also consider, though I also don't think she was necessarily primed to go on to win the game, even without the cookout there, though I think she at least would have made it possibly the final 3, final 2 even. However, the person I'm going to pick here is the person that actually created the cookout. He got Tiffany. Very good. I think Tiffany was in the spot where had it not been for the cookout, I still think Tiffany probably goes on to win. If not win, then she would have been this robbed goddess who got taken out at the very end, where, again, she was very much prime to really just dominate the season. I mean, she had like pretty much every path open for her, and obviously she takes the cookout path, which again, I understand fully why she does that, but it also is a spot where it's probably the worst path for her for the game of it all, but obviously, again, this wasn't about the game, which is kind of the point. But if we are analyzing this purely from a game perspective, I do feel like Tiffany's the person to mention here, as I do think she was actually the most affected by picking the Cookout, as I do think that led to her going in an endgame that she was, again, at the bottom of the alliance, where, again, she had so many other options to where she probably would have been guaranteed final 3, and her being a very likely winner if she got to the end, where, again, I do think Tiffany at the end of the day is someone that was the person that probably was the most affected by the Cookout, going from a near winning position to, again, her being just the first out of the alliance. Next up would be BB24, and again, a few people to consider here. I mean, Alyssa Snyder is someone to mention as someone that probably is in a good spot how the Kyle situation not happen, where, again, if Kyle does not get blown up in the way that he does, and Kyle's going to try to get to the end of Alyssa, where Alyssa probably beats him in a jury vote, to where, again, she was probably in a decent spot to win before that, so, again, that's something. I also mentioned Michael for the veto comp at the double where he was taken out, where he's part of the challenge like malfunction, where that's something to mention, though, again, I did not go with him. Harrence is someone to mention, and again, similar light to Alyssa, then I think if not for the Kyle situation, he probably makes it much deeper in the game, though at the end of the day, again, he was never winning anyway. And also, I'll consider Amira, where I think Amira was very much screwed over by the Festy Bestie twist, where obviously, again, it's not like she played particularly great in the grand scheme of things, and at the end of the day, like, the leftovers was formed to flip against her alliance. The thing is that she was not the initial target for that alliance. The initial target was going to be Nicole, yet Nicole was tied up with Taylor, and they needed Taylor's number for a vote, to where that led to Amira being taken out, and due to that consequence, to where, again, I think that's a bit unfortunate. Yeah, I think there's a more definitive answer. The answer here for BB24 is Joseph. And again, Joseph is taken out due to split house twist. Realistically, again, he was not really in a great spot to go on to win the game anyway. Again, he was kind of in a spot where, while he had his, like, really solid group with, again, him being super close to Monty, him obviously having the connection to Taylor, he didn't really have many other people outside that. Again, the likes of Michael and Brittany were wanting to target him eventually, though they just didn't want to be the ones to actually take the shot directly. But again, Kyle was ready to take the shot at him, and he wasn't really long for the game either way, but he was in a spot where, obviously, through to the split house twist, it really just essentially screws him. It essentially takes away all of his allies and puts him in a spot where he's with his biggest enemy, along with also other people that don't have much connection to him in Alyssa and Terrence, to where, again, I think it's just the overall house makeup there was something that very much disfavored him, and again, kind of made him the easy target by the end, where, again, I do think it's very unfortunate how all that plays out. So again, I went with him here. Next, we're BB25, and BB25 is one that I could not think of a proper answer here, where I think this is a season that a lot of people were, like, benefited by twists, and while there's, again, some people that were definitely harmed by, like, comp runs in the game, I didn't feel like there was, like, a super easy answer here. But again, I consider Suri, who obviously had this, like, big power structure around her and was in a pretty decent spot, and I think Suri is actually probably the closest to being the answer outside the person I picked, in the sense that she very much gets screwed over by the decisions that Jared makes, where Jared kind of blows up his own game, and for Izzy also as well, where through both of them, her position ends up completely souring, though at the same time, it's not like Suri is playing flawlessly either way. But, and I do think she gets screwed over by the actions of her own alliance more so than the actions of herself, in a spot where, again, she was also, like, tied to Felicia, to where she couldn't really game talk for a while. So again, I think that is obviously a very unfortunate circumstance. Corey, someone to mention here, is someone that maybe gets taken out due to the double veto. Now, realistically, he probably still goes that week anyway, though, again, at least there's a wonky-ish circumstance there to talk about. Mimi is someone to mention here, as someone that gets taken out by someone that was literally just got evicted from the game and came back, to where, again, that's at least something, but obviously she was not really that well positioned at that point either way. Izzy is someone I'll mention here, as someone that, and while, again, there is poor play in her telling Corey that she wants America out, I still feel like there was a lot of balls in motion there that led to her elimination, some of which coming from Jared, where, I mean, there's still some bad luck in all that. Also, I'll mention Kirsten, who is someone that I don't think was really given that fair of a shot in the game, where obviously she played poorly on day one, but after that, no one really gave her time of day, and she was just this easy person to take out. And along with that, also the Luke ejection is someone to mention, where Luke being ejected from the game, again, would have opened up the opportunity for Kirsten being saved, yet they didn't. So again, I decided to consider her, but the person I picked here ends up being actually the second boot of the season. We got Riley. And again, I think this is a spot where there's not really a good answer for this season. However, I feel like Riley is someone to mention here in the sense that if this had been a normal season of Big Brother without any pregame relationships, I think Riley at least does much better in the game. I think Riley's in a spot where I think she's disfavored by two factors in this game. The fact that, again, there's a lot more age diversity, to where a lot of the older players got together, to where normally Riley would just dominate the majority alliance and be able to ride that for a few weeks, where I think that's something to mention. The other thing is the fact that her game is initially sunk due to the Jared-Suri relationship, where, again, she tries to rope in Jared into her alliance, and Jared just rats her out to Suri, which gets Suri to go mobilize the other side of the house. And to fair, again, I think Suri would have picked up on that eventually either way, would have done the same thing. But again, I feel like it's a spot where she is directly affected by the Jared Suri relationship. Or I don't feel like she played particularly well outside that. I do think she is directly affected by, again, something that she never could have guessed of Jared Suri being mother and son, to where, again, I think that's at least something. So again, I picked her here. Next for BB26. And there's actually like a decent amount of people to mention here. Though again, not really like one that was like directly screwed over without any other outside circumstances, to where, again, for me, there's not really like a definitive answer here, but people to consider, I did consider T-Core, who I think had a pretty precise situation for her to be taken out, where I do think Angela not one to veto. I do think T-Core would have probably stayed, and even then, I think Leah is probably one of the only people in the house willing to take a shot at T-Core at that specific point, to where, again, I think she gets unfortunate there, but again, did not pick her. I did consider Joseph, and Joseph was one of the closest ones to being picked here, where I think Joseph's in a spot where, again, he Gets taken out simply because Mackenzie switched her vote because she felt bad for chemo, where, again, I think that's a spot where Joseph almost stays. And while, again, there's still poor play in him not being able to convince Quinn and not put him up to begin with, I feel like, again, he gets taken out in a very wonky way, so I at least considered him. I also considered Tucker, where, I mean, again, Tucker gets very much saved by twists along the way, but the fact that, again, he has a pretty unfortunate AI arena where he just misunderstands the rules, and that leading to his elimination, something to at least mention here. I also mentioned Lisa, who is someone that, by the time she was taken out, she was largely taken out due to the notion that people thought she had a power, where that entire misunderstanding is part of what leads to Target sticking on her. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I still feel like there's enough poor play there to where I didn't really end up picking her. But the person I ended up going with here ends up being Cedric. Now, again, Cedric obviously played poorly to get into the spot he was in. He self-nominated himself, and that's something you can criticize him for. But beyond that, I think he gets very unlucky in how everything plays out, where no one wanted Cedric out of the game. People did not want Cedric to be the casualty in this like flip against the Pentagon, yet he just ended up being the one that was on the block by that point. And even beyond that, he was safe and Mackenzie did not win the AI arena. He gets very unlucky in that. Also, if there's no AI arena, he's probably not on the block to begin with, where he would not have self-nominated himself if there's no AI arena. And even if he did, more than likely, he's just ending up on the block against MJ, where MJ goes home. Where, again, I do think Cedric gets very unlucky in how everything plays out, to where, while, again, he was dumb to self-nominate himself to begin with, I think the fact that all of these other factors end up coming into play that led to his elimination were things that, again, were unlucky for him. So, again, I end up going with Cedric here. And again, that is the mainline show. Now let's get into the spin-offs. I guess we'll go through them in a chronological order, because why not? So we're starting off with OTT. And actually, there's a lot of considerations here, especially considering the wonky format of OTT. But again, I'll consider Justin here, where I do think Justin was pretty close to winning the game. He gets eliminated in a competition against Morgan, where had there been a more natural format, had like Jason had the sole vote to evict, I do think Jason takes Justin to the end, and Justin beats him in a public vote, to where I think Justin was very close to winning the game. Yeah, I didn't go with him. Whitney is someone to mention here, where she kind of gets sniped out of the game due to the fact that Morgan had gotten the care package during the double, which kept her and Shelby safe, which through that, Whitney was the next on the pecking order, though at the same time, again, Whitney was always at the bottom anyway, so didn't look at her too highly. Alex is someone to mention here as someone that was actually in a pretty good spot initially, though kind of gets all that unraveled due to all the other twists that were happening, where I think had this been a natural season Big Brother without all these care packages and America getting the vote and evictions, I do feel like Alex is actually in a pretty good spot, with I think her side probably winning out in the battle, though, and we didn't actually get to see that. Now, again, I'll also mention people that were nominated by America. People like Neely, who is, again, nominated by America and taken out by America's vote. That's something to mention. Monty is someone that also was nominated by America and taken out because of that. Cornbread is also someone to mention that was also nominated by America and was taken out by that. But again, all those people would not have gone home during their respective weeks had it not been for America. So again, that's at least something to mention. Yeah, the person I'm going to end up picking here ends up being Shelby. And again, this might feel a little bit random. Yeah, I feel like Shelby is in this spot where I do think she gets screwed over by the fact that Justin ends up getting the final care package in the game. Where again, by the end of the season, only Justin had not gotten a care package. So through that, he automatically got the final care package, which was Final 5 immunity. Essentially, through him not ever being the number one pick for America, he ends up being given immunity in a spot where he probably actually would have gone home that week, or at least would have been in serious danger, which again is the reason why I didn't pick Justin to begin with. But again, it's a spot where Morgan had one HOH, Jason had one veto, and because of Justin being safe, the only reign on was Shelby, where Shelby's proceeded to be voted out because now the other side had the numbers. So where, and had that not been the case, Justin's probably just the reign on, and Justin probably goes home against Christy. And again, in that spot in the final four, if Shelby gets to the end, I think Shelby wins. Again, Shelby was more popular than Morgan at the time, and considering again there was this big ball smashers contingent of the vote, I do think Shelby more than likely wins if she gets to the end, where, again, I think that for me ends up being a more unfortunate circumstance than someone like Justin. I think Justin was kind of fortunate in the fact that he even got the Final Four, where I feel like Shelby kind of gets screwed over the fact that she wasn't at Final Four. So again, because I went with Shelby in this spot. Now we're moving on to Celebrity Big Brother. We got Celebrity Big Brother Season 1, and in here there's a few considerations. Ross is someone to mention as someone that I do think would have had a much better chance at winning a jury vote had it not been a non-sequestered jury. Though realistically, again, it's not enough to where, again, I do think Shannon and Omarosa left very bitter at him, where I don't think they were voting for him and probably would have turned the jury against him either way. Keisha is someone to mention here as someone that got unlucky in the fact that her breast milk was depleting. So that's something. Chuck also gets unfortunate here in the fact that, again, he was the pawn. Most people didn't want him out. They simply voted him out because it felt like James was a better weapon to use in the game, and also Chuck was someone that was closer to Omarosa and Keisha, kind of. So again, that was kind of why that shot ends up being taken, to where, again, that's at least a consideration. Now, the person I did pick here ends up being Mark McGrath. And the reason for this is because I do think Mark gets very unfortunate in how the end game ends up playing out here, where had this been a natural season of Big Brother, I think Mark probably goes on the win, where, again, Mark would have beaten Ross at the end, and Ross wanted to take Mark to the end. Mark wanted to take Ross to the end, where it had everything played out naturally, and this had been a Final 2. I think Ariadna probably goes at Final 4, and, again, had Ross or Mark just won Final HOH, again, Mark's won the game. And beyond that, even if in the actual format that we got, had Mark or Ross won Final HOH, Mark wins the game. So again, he had pretty good odds coming into the end game, though kind of gets unlucky by the overall format of the end game, along with the fact that obviously Marissa ends up winning Final HOH. So again, I think that's the reason why I went with Mark here. Next up, moving on to Celebrity Brother 2, and I think there's a very easy answer here. Now, again, I'll consider someone like a Ricky, who I think is someone that his jury chances were kind of squandered by the fact that this was a celebrity season, and they had watched the show from home, saw the reaction to Tamar, and I think that led to them wanting Tamar to win a bit more. Yeah, again, at the end of the day, did not go with him. Also, I considered Lolo, who, well, again, there is definitely poor play in her not accepting Ricky's Final 2 deal. I think she would have been in a better spot had it been a natural Final 3 instead of, again, the Final 4 where Ricky votes out 2 people, where, again, she could have still won that Final HOH. And again, had she taken Ricky to the end, which was her plan, she wins the game. So again, that's at least something to mention. But again, the main culprits here end up being the people affected by the twist back in week 1, where, again, I'll mention Ryan as someone that had his HOH kind of hijacked by that twist, and had it not happen, he would have at least had more allies in the game, though I'm going to go with the person that was actually more directly affected by it, and that person is Jonathan. Where, again, Jonathan was in a spot where initially he was well situated in the game, and obviously that eventually all flips against him, but that would have mattered if he wasn't automatically put on the block from the very beginning, where obviously he's kind of screwed over by the fact that he does well in the first competition, and had that not been the case, he wouldn't have been in the competition against Ryan, where he would have been automatically nominated, where, again, that's such a dumb twist to begin with, that he's essentially punished for doing well in the first competition, and that actually leads to his ouster, to where, again, I do think there's a lot of unlucky circumstances in that, to where, again, I think he's the easy pick. Next up for Celebrity Brother 3, and straight up, there's not a good answer for this. I don't think there's much to really answer here, to where I know a lot of people will mention Shayna as someone that gets, again, unfortunate in the fact that Todrick flips the entire house against her, though, again, I think that's kind of poor play from her, but I do think she gets unfortunate in the fact that she couldn't play in the veto, but again, that's not really enough for me. So the person I actually am going in here with is, again, not really that good of an answer, but I think there's enough unlucky circumstances there to name him here, and that person is actually Todrick. And again, Todrick is someone that, obviously, again, most people won't agree with this, but I do think Todrick gets a bit unlucky in how, again, this is a celebrity season, though, to be fair, I think he also gets lucky in that sense, and since there's a lot of people that don't really care about the actual game, and a lot of people that, again, he's friends with, where, again, he also gets benefited by that, but I do think he's also harmed by that, to where I think this is a spot where I think the jury, seeing how hated Todrick was outside the show, did end up affecting his jury prospects, where people didn't want to vote for him because that's where I think if that was not the case, I think had it been a more natural jury, I think Todrick would have had more of a shot at winning the game. I mean, even someone like Chris Kirkpatrick is someone that was extremely bitter against Todrick, but that's largely because he saw the comments that Todrick made about him outside the show, where if he never knew about that, again, I think he at least has more of a chance of voting for Todrick. Same thing with Todd Bridges, we know, came out of the house being pro-Todrick and then ends up seeing the online reaction, ends up becoming anti-Todrick. So again, I think Todrick was definitely affected by the overall format of the season, but at the end of the day, again, he knew that format. So again, it's tough to really say him, but I don't think there really is a good answer outside that. So again, I guess I'm going Todrick. Next up for Reindeer Games, and I think there's, again, a bit of a simple answer here. Now, again, I would say someone like Brittany is someone to mention, the fact that I think she gets very unfortunate in her actual Santa Showdown, that being a competition that very much favored Xavier with her having no real shot. So again, I'll at least mention that. Cody is someone I'll mention as someone that had a massive target coming in this season. everyone wanted him out from the very beginning, so again, that's at least something to mention. And also Cameron is someone I'll mention as someone that also had no real shot. He was kind of like the new guy on the block, the easy person to put up, so again, that's also someone to consider. But the person I went with here ends up being Danielle Reyes, who, again, seemed to be in a pretty decent spot in the game. Again, had a lot of allies in the game, though gets taken out here where she's kind of sniped out due to this very weird format for Santa Showdown, where, while again, it made for great TV, I do think from a game perspective, I do think it led to her being very unlucky, where while obviously like Brittany picks her, and I think she mishandled her relationship with Brittany, it was still a spot where, again, so many people had gone through the comp already, again, Frankie, Xavier, Brittany, to where I do think she was very unfortunate in the fact that that was the exact format of this competition, where I think otherwise she actually would have been in a pretty decent spot. But again, I think this was a round that plays out in a very unfortunate way for her, so again, I went with Danielle here. But with that, again, that is the entirety of Big Brother US history, talking about who is the most screwed over player for each season. Now, and down the road, I'll still continue doing similar videos to this for Big Brother Survivor. Maybe at some point I'll actually do like a top 10 most screwed over players instead of just like breaking it down by season like this. But I was, again, just expect more of the same style of content from the channel. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.